The Middle East is reaching a dangerous turning point with the war spreading and warnings that things could spiral into what the US president is calling all hell raining down on Iran. Military moves are accelerating. Sensitive sites, including nuclear facilities, are being targeted, and political calculations are running headlong into serious strategic risks. Amid all this tension, the world is calling for action to contain the crisis and avoid a regional disaster, while cautious diplomatic efforts are starting to take shape. Trump's mixed messages aren't helping. His unpredictability is hitting the US and the global economy hard, and his erratic foreign policy is proving costly, while Iran is still resilient. All this and more shortly. Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's special. And before we bring in our guest to discuss the developments, here's the latest. The war in the Middle East remains volatile, with the United States and Iran engaged in escalating military actions and sharp rhetoric, while diplomatic efforts continue without a clear breakthrough. Let's get all these details in this report by Zahra Farjani, and then we get back to discussion.
The Middle East is still in chaos as the United States and Iran exchange warnings and military strikes with no clear breakthrough despite ongoing diplomatic efforts. US President Donald Trump has given Iran a 48-hour ultimatum to reach an agreement to end the war, now ongoing for more than a month.
Remember when I gave Iran 10 days to make a deal or open up the Hormuz Strait? Time is running out, 48 hours before all hell will rain down on them.
On the ground, Iran says it is responding forcefully. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps announced the downing of another U.S. drone south of Tehran, identifying it as an MQ-1. Iranian media also reported that on Friday, 2 drones and a U.S. fighter jet were shot down. According to Iranian military officials, newly developed domestically produced air defense systems were used to intercept advanced aircraft. Meanwhile, the Pentagon says the conflict is taking a toll on the U.S. forces. At least 13 American soldiers have been killed, with more than 365 injured since the start of the war. Strikes are also intensifying inside Iran. Iranian sources report missile attacks on petrochemical facilities in the southwestern city of Mashhad, as well as strikes on industrial sites and energy infrastructure. Amid growing concerns, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has issued a stark warning over the potential targeting of the Bushehr nuclear power plant.
Remember the Western outrage about hostilities near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine. Israel, US have bombed our Bushehr plant 4 times now. Radioactive fallout will end life in GCC capitals, not Tehran. Attacks on our petrochemicals also convey real objectives.
Araghchi also criticized what he called international double standards, pointing to the lack of global reaction compared to past nuclear incidents.
Iran's position is being misrepresented by US media. We are deeply grateful for Pakistan for its effort and have never refused to go to Islamabad. What we care about are the terms of a conclusive and lasting end to the illegal war that is imposed on us.
As military operations intensify and diplomatic pressure mounts, the next 48 hours could prove decisive, determining whether the region moves toward de-escalation or a deeper war.
And let's bring in our guest now. Tonight, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts to unpack the escalating crisis in the Middle East and what it means for the world. Dr. Julia Raknipad, an international relations expert from Taylor's University in Kuala Lumpur, specializing in diplomacy and regional politics. Hello there, Professor, and thank you for agreeing to be with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. And Dr. Hamoud Salhi, an Associate Dean and Professor of International Education at California State University, Dominguez Hills in Los Angeles, offering a global perspective on education policy and conflict resolution. Hello there, Professor, and thank you for agreeing to be with us, Dr. Hamoud.
Always our pleasure, Kareem.
Thank you indeed. And also we're joined by Dr. James H. Kavanagh, a geopolitical analyst and independent journalist based in New York with insights on on-the-ground developments and media perspectives. Hello there, Professor, and thank you for agreeing to be with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Our pleasure. And also we have Dr. Khodr M. Zarour, a MENA and U.S. foreign policy, strategy and security expert at North Carolina State University in Raleigh, bringing deep knowledge of defense and military affairs. Hello there, Professor, and thank you for being with us.
Hello, thank you for the invite. Hello to everyone.
Thank you. So let me kick the debate start with you, Dr. Julia Rocknifard. We had all actually watched the speech of Donald Trump a couple of days ago. What were your initial thoughts on his latest address on the Iran conflict, and what stood out most in tone, messaging, and strategy for you?
Well, Donald Trump keeps trying to reconfigure or rephrase the initial goals of the operation in Iran that he had, and we've seen it throughout the operation, throughout the war that he waged on Iran on starting 28 February this year. And in the recent speech, we could see an attempt for a face-saving exit, although we're still also facing a high possibility of the ground operation, or that so-called off-ramp that everybody has been talking about lately, by putting the responsibility, the onus of responsibility on the allies or on whatever states that benefit from the passage of energy resources, oil and gas through the Strait of Hormuz. So if before there was more statement, there was more emphasis on how much of a threat Iran poses to the United States and to the world, and the United States standing at the front line of this defense of the world against the villain, which Iran is. Now he takes more of a seat back, arguing that it's not the job of the United States, even if they started this campaign, or you break it, you buy it. As Senator Lindsey Graham said that I don't buy that. So it's not our responsibility to take care of it, and whatever comes further, including the unblocking of the Strait of Hormuz. So the bottom line here, I think it's the attempt to justify, why the other allies did not join on Donald Trump's demand to help the United States to unblock the Strait of Hormuz, which proved to be quite impossible to do until now, and proved to be a very strong leverage in the hands of Tehran. And also to provide for a graceful, if it's possible at all in this situation, graceful exit from this quagmire that he got himself entangled in.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that there would be any exit whatsoever? Because just recently we have read in his Truth Social that he would be raining down what he called all hell on Iran.
Yes, and bombing Iran back into the Stone Age, to which Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, I think, showed him the picture where Iran was at the Stone Age, which was still a more developed civilization than whatever was in the place of the United States at the moment, or the rest of the world, for that matter. I think everything points to the higher chances of that ground operation, which still is quite unclear how it's going to be executed. First of all, of course, as Pete Hegseth also pointed out recently, that they cannot disclose the plans, of course, of such an operation. So there is just as much that we can know and guess. But by whichever projection that we might imagine, it doesn't seem like a good prospect for the United States. And as I once stated before, the ground operation could be used partly to justify the casualties of the already ongoing war, which I believe is far more than just 13, the officially declared number by some estimates, it is at least 100 by the number of the military equipment destroyed and some other measurements. So it's more pointing towards this ground operation, which could be either occupying an island, including Har Island, as has been discussed, the major where the major oil facilities are placed, Iran exporting oil facilities, or even as central to the territory of Iran as in Isfahan, where it is believed the stockpile of enriched uranium has been located since the 12-day war last year, trying to destroy that and again claim that Iran's nuclear program, the military component of it, has been destroyed, so there's nothing to worry about. But that is, by any estimate, I believe, is going to be a bloodbath if there is such a plan. However, it is still leaning, the chances are still leaning towards the ground operation. It's not that he's going to pull out just now.
Clear. Now, let me bring in Dr. Khodr Zarour. If we come to look at the speech that Donald Trump delivered, it did seem rather contradictory. On the one hand, he claimed U.S. war goals were met, yet operations are extended, and the threats of strikes on Iran's infrastructure continue. Now, how should we interpret this, especially that we have just read on his Truth Social that he is going to actually go on with the operation, perhaps a ground operation, perhaps more airstrikes to bomb Iran and rain what he said, all hell?
Well, thank you for the question. This is a great question. Unfortunately, from the White House, we have seen what I call the cart is pulling the horse and not the horse pulling the cart. We have seen intention of a policy, statement of policies, but not clear policies with regard especially to Iran, much less a global strategy on war on terrorism or global American strategy. That is not clear from day one. What I mean by that is, last year we had negotiations. This year we were in the middle of negotiations, and then we started a war, which really it's undemocratic. Certainly doesn't achieve President Trump's agenda in the long term. He went in without allies. He went in without the consent of the members of Congress, especially leadership in Congress. Certainly, the president, he was overconfident after the short adventure in Venezuela. He was empowered. He was over-empowered, overextended his power in the region. Everyone advised him on both sides of the aisle in Congress that Iran is not Venezuela. Certainly, he will have challenges. Since 1979, we know the Iranians will close down the Strait of Hormuz. We're aware of that. And why would he send the military, beef up the military, if he wanted to go to war in the first place? Why negotiate in the first place? Those are contradictory questions and statements and actions. This is not new from this current White House. We were hoping, the American people were hoping the war will end soon. We have seen this with the Bush administration, 2003, 2 months into the war in Iraq, that we have mission accomplished. Our mission 25 years later is still not accomplished. And Mr. Trump has fell into the same mistake that Mr. Bush did. And he was adamant on avoiding in the process, and he did not. These are the contradictory statements that he was hoping initially that this war will only last a couple days, maybe a week. The first week, mission accomplished. Second week, we are winning. Third week, we need help. The fourth week, he blames NATO. And we have seen this from the White House, again, as devoid of policy and accuracy in his statements. Simply put, I think the president is misled by his own internal security team, firing people, especially in the inner circle during a time of war, certainly doesn't help his agenda.
Thank you indeed. And this leads me to the next question to you, Dr. Hamoud Salhi. Is the president really misled? Is his administration in the dark about long-term consequences? Or is this maybe deliberate signaling? Do they even fully grasp the situation on the ground?
I think only President Donald Trump knows. Certainly, there isn't a discussion about the next day. And that's by that sort of the consequences. Where is this leading? What are the goals? How clear we are? Is he getting the wrong advice? He's not advised, has not been advised. Certainly, we hear reports from here and there. But I think it's clearly the picture is, despite when we talk about there are no clear goals, Donald Trump is very, very smart and is very clever in terms of public relation. The signals that he sent, mixed or not mixed, are designed for a purpose. For example, the deadline for April 6th. We know very well that the 10-day retrieve that he gave had to do with getting the forces, to rally the forces to this region, particularly the Gulf region. That goal now, with the exception of a few areas here and there, by the next 48 hours, the United States ground forces and aerial forces are ready. So the idea is to distract attention away from what's happening on the ground, sending the perception that he's looking for solutions. And while the American the American military is doing what is expected to do. So has he listened to advice? The report suggests that Donald Trump has made up his mind. Now he is, as our guest suggested earlier, he's looking for an off-ramp. And I think he's caught in a very, very difficult situation. He needs to leave sooner than later because the elections are coming. The prices of oil are getting higher and higher, and American people are start to feel it. Soon, the prices of goods. Some reports now are coming out by the mainstream media comparing prices of milk, prices of basic food. These are the people, that are necessary basic foods. Those prices are also up. And that's what concerns Donald Trump, is got himself into this. Now, what is the best way of getting out? And you could see that clearly in his speech.
Thank you indeed. And now let me bring Dr. James Kavanagh. Dr. James, excuse me, from your global perspective and in light of what has been just discussed by our distinguished guests, is this inconsistency, if I may call it, typical of U.S. strategy, or is this something unusual? We see it only with Donald Trump.
Well, first of all, you can call me Jim. Secondly, this is a peculiarity of Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump is particularly ignorant and particularly does not understand the consequences of what he's doing. I mean, there's a level at which it's the epitome of the American attitude of exceptionalism, certainly since the demise of the Soviet Union in 1991, where the American power was American government and American ruling class presumed it had the power to start wars whenever it wanted, to attack whomever it wanted, starting with Yugoslavia, and also, importantly, to end conflicts when it wanted. The American government assumed, oh, we're so powerful that if we start a fight with someone and we decide we want to take a break from it, nobody we're attacking is going to dare say, oh, no, we don't want to take a break. Yeah, please, let's have a break. Now, that's been the case up until what's happening in Ukraine, where it turns out that Russia is going to say, we don't want to have a ceasefire. We're going to keep fighting. Now, Russia is a superpower. The Americans never dreamed that a kind of middle power, which was not even considered the most powerful country in the region, everybody assumed Israel was the most powerful country in the region, you know, that middle power, under attack from the United States and Israel, the two nuclear powers, would dare not to stop fighting. If the Americans and Israelis said, oh, let's take a break. But that's not the case. They've underestimated entirely the power of Iran. They have, as they have since the demise, overestimated their own power. It wasn't really an overestimation for 20 years or 30 years, but now it is. The relative power of the United States has declined, and they don't believe it. They still think they rule the world. Donald Trump is even worse. Donald Trump is running his head on World War II movies. And he thinks, I'm going to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours by the force of his personality, really. And it's just silly. Now, he has people around him, I hope, some people at least, who understand what's going on. But clearly, he was pushed into this and cajoled into it by Netanyahu and by his Zionist advisors who've been pushing for this for 40 years. And they telling, like they said about Iraq, oh, I promise you that if we take out Iraq, the whole region is going to be better. It will take us a couple of weeks to do it. It's exactly what they told Bush. And now the American people have learned about this. They're opposed to this. And when Bush went into Iraq, 70% of the people supported him because of 9/11. Donald Trump going into Iran and starting this fight, 70% of the people are opposed. But Donald Trump is fundamentally a weak person and a weak politician, and he's amenable to being pushed by the most powerful and most obsequious people around him who are kissing his butt and telling him how great he is. And as your other guest said, the Venezuelan thing was a terrible prelude to this. It was an amuse-bouche that, he thought, oh, now this is going to, like he said it 100 times, this is just going to be like Venezuela. That's just ignorant. But the driving force behind this is the American attachment and marriage to Israel and to Zionism. And they have been pushing for this for 40 years. And Barack Obama had the good sense to go into the JCPOA, but even Democrats didn't support it. Chuck Schumer didn't like the JCPOA. The Zionist influence in America has always wanted to go after Iran because that's what Israel wants. They've gone after every other country that supported the Palestinian movement materially, militarily, economically. And Iran is the last important standing one, and they want to get rid of it. And they need the United States to do that, and they're using the United States to do it. The problem now is some level of Donald Trump absolutely wants to get out. At another level, he doesn't know how to. And he really is in that chess position in chess called zugzwang. Chess was invented by the Persians, where you have to make a move. It's your turn to move. You have to move, but no move is going to do anything but hurt you. And that's his situation now. If he goes for this, I think probably, unfortunately, 70% he will do some kind of ground operation, which every military analyst in the United States is saying this is going to be a disaster. It's going to be, if you remember the Battle of Khe Sanh, you'll have these American troops, even if they land, even if they take up some few square miles of Iranian territory, they'll be under the incessant attack from all the forces around. It's a country of 92 million people, and a million-man army. They can't hold that territory. The entire American military is not going to be forced to defend that particular patch of territory. And it's going to be a disaster politically. So, and if he comes out, it's going to be, but it really is already the end of the American empire. This is an empire in decline, thrashing around.
Thank you for all those insights. It seems that it's not going to be a walk in the park, apparently, Dr. Hamoud Salhi. But then when we go back to the speech of Donald Trump, did you have any main or key takeaways? Did it clarify the U.S. objectives, or did it raise more questions?
I don't think the purpose of the speech was to deal with the war or the day after. It was more like a speech very short by Donald Trump standards, around 19 minutes. And it talked about, number one, the place perhaps of Donald Trump in the history. How is this action evolves, or what's happening in foreign policy, all of it evolves around him. But there was sort of some points that one could look at. For example, the Hormuz was absent. In fact, to Donald Trump, the United States has enough oil and it doesn't need the passage of Hormuz, and that the European should take care of that, and they should take the lead and be brave. There was also the issue of, the ground forces. Could be tactical. There was no mention about that. Overall, what the speech designed was, because we're coming on the weekend and we are about to launch or fulfill or meet his threat or deliver his threat on Monday, United States time, April 6th. That gives you the weekends. The goal is that the speech will lead to lower prices of oil and the stock market will go up. But it raised the opposite, because the speech did not have any impact. Mm-hmm. So like in most cases, Donald Trump is very calculating. And despite what we think, as our guest earlier said, there is the Israeli plan there. There are some personal agendas as well. Talk about Epstein's file, all of that. Those are having impact, but things are not what the speech delivered. We have no clue how is that impact the geopolitical goals of the United States. What is the relationship? We're all expecting, for example, to talk about NATO. And NATO is a major force, and there are rules there. And then, even if you are in the Gulf countries, is that NATO? Was NATO expected to be in Iran? Is it expected to go there? How does that affect Article 6 of the NATO that specifically state geographical designation that doesn't include the Gulf? So there were so many issues there that are of great importance. But I believe that the plan is how to get us from Monday or Wednesday, from Wednesday or Thursday, especially with the market close and Friday, Saturdays and Sundays, how to get us to Mondays. And the hope is that the stock market will soar, and then we'll get on this war and we'll do it very quickly. And those are sort of that's a Trumpian perspective. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And back to you, Dr. Julia Rocknifad. If we come to read analysis and reports here and there, we come across the report by Robert Kagan, in which he calls the US a rogue superpower, arguing Trump's Iran approach abandons post-World War II alliances. Do you agree with this, or do you think this is an exaggeration?
Well, it feels like rogue superpower has been brought into the title for the sake of making it more attractive. That's for sure. And sometimes you don't have a say against what the editor suggests in such cases. But the whole long read by Robert Kagan is an outline of how the United States is undermining the already crumbling global order, and under Trump, it accelerates this process. The thing is, I think for the author of that article is also important to advocate for the camp within the foreign policy establishment within the United States that stands on the on the positions of supporting Ukraine in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, or how Russia sees it between Russia and the collective West. And it's difficult for him to see how that attention has been sliding away under Trump's leadership. And there was a hope that probably the United States will finally maybe reorient towards another camp within the foreign policy establishment and starts tackling China. But that also has not been happening, and we've seen even forces being pulled out of the Pacific where they should be present should China decide to reoccupy or retake over Taiwan, which also for some has been a concern within the foreign policy establishment. So that all, the abandonment of these causes results from Trump's dedication to the Middle Eastern conflict, which is not in America's interest. And I think he goes in great depths, historical depths, to explain how before it could have been necessary or unnecessary, and how it has caused even 9/11. That it has been, the terrorism has been the result of the U.S. presence in the Middle East, not because that America was attacked, not because of who they were, or but because of where they were. They were present in the Middle East, engaged in disruptive operations, more than in one country, as we know, not just Iran of 1953, something that left Iranians deeply resentful. At the very least since 1953, but we could even count it far deeper back into history. So I would say that what he's trying to lay out, and that some also paid attention to that fact that indeed America stands here now as a withering hegemon, which refuses to give up this perception of power that they used to have, and to readjust to this new international order. And under Trump, this process has been accelerating. At the same time, we are seeing a lot of realignment happening in the so-called global South. Maybe it's not much that we hear now, not much that we don't hear that concerted message on the part of the global South that we want America to stop, but definitely behind the scenes a lot has been going on, including that in the first days of the war, in the first week at the very least, the Gulf powers started contacting Vladimir Putin in order to resolve the ongoing conflict, and given Russia's vested interest in Iran as well, and whatever is going on in the Middle East, since it's even geographically closer to it, and there are some other considerations. And China has been trying to negotiate behind the scenes and has been putting a lot of importance into that, and that's why he was unwilling to be disruptive or too critical of what the United States has been doing, because it wanted to have that fairly invisible hand in order to claim the diplomatic victory later on. So a lot of the effects of the United States being that rogue state that Robert Kagan claims has been in place, has been taking place, and I think we are going to see more results of that, not only in the sense of restructuring that will take place in the Middle East, in Iran itself, which has been made more radical than before, at least in terms of its opposition to Israel and the United States, but also globally in terms of how realignment will take place, especially between the global South, but also between the former allies of the United States, which include, for that matter, the EU and the UK.
Thanks, indeed. Now, Dr. James Kavanagh, if we come to look at it again, you did mention earlier in your analysis that the U.S. was too dependent on the Zionist entity's interest. Now, it has for decades, been involved with the Zionist entity, but all these decades, have it really served American interests whatsoever? And if not, how should alliances be reconsidered?
Well, that article by Robert Kagan, it's interesting because he says very clearly, America's been Zionist because they're guilty over the Holocaust, but none of it serves America's national security interests. This is amazing coming from Robert Kagan. And Robert Kagan saying, now America's a rogue superpower. Well, America's been a rogue superpower for at least 30 years, largely because of people like Robert Kagan and his wife. And yes, we are in a situation now for the first time since the Gaza situation. Americans are waking up to what Zionism is and to its influence in the United States. It's been incredibly powerful in the United States, but most people have not been aware of it. They didn't really think about it. But with Gaza, people have been saying, my gosh, is this what Zionism is? And my God, is it really? Did we get into wars with Iraq and Syria and Libya And this war, because of to protect Zionism, and we did. And so now the American populace is becoming, there's a strain of real anti-Zionism, and Republican and Democratic in the American populace, and that's a big problem. And this is the case. You know, the United States, on behalf, with Israel, and sometimes on its own, but also sometimes with Israel, you know, it's been rogue. They haven't paid attention to international law. They haven't done that at all. So now the American people are saying, well, we're suspicious of that. We want America first. We don't want to do any more wars for Israel. And that's a big problem. Unfortunately, the political and media class is still 100% Zionist, or at least 99. I'll say 99 or 98. It's changing a little bit, but it may not change fast enough. That's one of the reasons that Israel wants this war now, because the support for Israel in the United States is declining and will continue to decline. So this is part of the problematic that we're in and why they're pushing for it. And unfortunately, or fortunately really, the United States doesn't control anything. It doesn't control everything anymore in the way that it did. It doesn't control this. It's lost control of this conflict. And they are now going to be deciding, but the United States also lost control, not only, well, let's put it this way. There are other players here. Israel and Iran are going to decide what they want to do. And the fact is, Israel depends entirely on the United States, but the United States has never withdrawn support for Israel for anything they do. So Israel is still confident that whatever it does, the United States will follow along and support it. And as long as that's the case, Donald Trump can say he pulls out, but Iran won't stop and Israel won't stop. What's he going to do? You know, in fact, as long as the Americans give what they have given, an implicit and explicit security guarantee to Israel that we won't let you lose, then they're in the war, whatever Donald Trump wants to do. So this is the problematic the whole world is in now. This is a fight over the future of American hegemony in that region and Zionist hegemony in that region. And Israel's going to have a say in whether they want to cease fire or that. Because at the end of the day, the way it's looking now, Iran has become the major power in that region. Iran survives this and maintains its integrity and its coherence as a state. It becomes a major power. And it's not going to be the United States that, if there's a negotiation, who is going to do it? Again, the United States is losing not just military power and economic power, but diplomatic power, because Trump is a rogue elephant in the whole international order. I mean, so if someone turns to someone to negotiate this, they're not turning to the United States anymore. They're turning to Russia or China, probably Russia in this case, and the United States, which assumed over 30, 40 years that there's a diplomatic table in the world and we're at the head of it and we decide what to do and everybody comes to us. That's over. Mm-hmm. And Iran is creating a situation where America's military omnipotence and diplomatic head of the table posture is gone, and they don't want to accept it. So I don't know what they're going to do.
Perfect point, which brings me to Dr. Khudr Zarour. With Trump leaning on military action over diplomacy, as our distinguished guests just said, do you think the U.S. is approaching a point where unilateralism could be backfiring? From a regional view, does that word is a little tricky, unilateralism already look like it's backfiring?
Well, I think what we are witnessing now, unfortunately, it's sad to say, is Pax Americana is sailing into the sunset. And not because of internal civil war or foreign invasion or domestic terrorism. This conflict, we brought it on ourselves. I think since 2015, when Mr. Trump decided to run for office, the first thing he targeted was the Iran nuclear deal. And he said it's a bad deal. Well, if we negotiate one with Iran, it's going to be much, much, much worse for the U.S. if we reach that agreement. Unilateralism has been abused. It did work in the 1990s when there was no China rising. We didn't have, Russia was collecting its spoils or trying to reinvent itself as a new nation state to balance in Europe. And NATO is a baby of the United States. When we say NATO, we mean the U.S. That's exactly what we mean. But in this case, if NATO was attacked by Iran, regardless of space, regardless of geography, as one of your guests said, Article 6 in NATO Charter, if you attack NATO and NATO territory. Well, even if NATO was attacked, in this case, NATO was attacked by Iran, the president would have diplomatically found a solution to kind of gather support from NATO members, maybe the international leaders, like Mr. Bush 41, Bush Sr. did in 1990 in Iraq. And that worked because he used public diplomacy. He did not make any threats, even though he could have, because the U.S. was a unilateral power. Now, we don't have unilateralism in the world. It's multipolar system. Right? China is rising, and Mr. Trump, he keep increasing the taxes or tariffs or imposing sanctions on China. At the same time, he is undermining his own goal. No, I understand going to Venezuela. I understand. I think to cover the miscalculations in Iran, he may next weekend invade Cuba. And that would be more successful and easier to cover that kind of miscalculation. Unilateralism is dead or dying. Certainly multilateralism is growing. We have heard from one of your guests earlier. She mentioned that the global south is rising. They are kind of, if not totally ignoring the U.S., they're kind of bypassing the U.S. They don't need the U.S. blessings. They're trying to have their own currency. So the U.S., again, Pax Americana is being downgraded to a regional power, or maybe I would say hyperpower, but without ammunition. What I mean is the hyperpower has been downgraded to just military power. And as the saying goes, when you have a hammer, military in this case, everything began to appear like a hammer. And that's why Mr. Trump is using sanctions as a kind of a soft policy or soft power. And then ultimately, overnight, he shifts into hard power. He shifts into the nail, military action. That doesn't solve the problem. Even though it worked for one day in June last year, when he dropped 13 or 15 missiles on some nuclear site in Iran, and he said the war will stop tomorrow. The war did start tomorrow. Maybe that's the miscalculation of the Iranians. Had they continued the war, the U.S. did not have the military support in the region to fight back against Iran. Now, Iran is conquered. But back to unilateralism, that is a kind of a theory no longer in use or support U.S. interests. The U.S. has to, by the way, another miscalculation, the U.S. has let down its Gulf allies twice. Last June, Qatar was attacked by Israel. Mr. Trump, instead of condemning the attack, he said he's not happy, quote, how things went down. This doesn't seem to me or sound to me, it's not music to the ears of the Qataris, that this is condemnation of an attack on an ally where the Fifth Fleet is based. This year, all the countries in the region begged the president not to start a war. Let's continue in negotiations. So now we're back to unilateralism. Again, it's a weak policy. It's a theory no longer serve the interest of America.
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Dr. Hamoud Salhi? Despite all these insights that we are hearing from experts, we still hear Donald Trump repeatedly claiming success. Now, does this match reality, or does it really reveal a widening gap between the rhetoric and the outcomes?
It's hard to say what is for the narrative is exaggeration, and what is and who is listening to his messages. Of course, there is always the Trumpian base, the MAGA group, and there the MAGA base, and there he has support. So most of his narratives or speeches are directed to that group. And certainly, if you watch the certain stations, and my colleague would know that in the United States, there are stations that are fully supportive of Donald Trump, and that message of success fits very well. But on the ground, things are different. And we wondered, for example, this shift of focus, and again, it's on the ground, based on what we're attacking and what is happening, what are the sides. What we've seen the latest time, and this is before the April 10th deadline, 6th deadline, in the last few days, we started to see a hint, or the United States and Israel attacking the petrochemical industry. That was sort of something not accepted before. We saw also the United States attacking bridges, the bridge of Kark. For the Israelis, it is clear that they have come to the realization that dismantling regime change is no longer an opportunity or is feasible. So the goal of the Israelis is to create chaos where Iran will continue to be under conditions of instability, fragmentation, which lead it to be more interested in its internal survival, or the regime internal survival, more than expanding or developing power to threaten Israel. That is clear. For the United States, it seems we're moving toward the idea of, remember back in January, we told the Iranian, if you go and protest out there, we are going to support you. And for a while, we were told we should not be attacking, bombing infrastructure or areas, schools, universities. Remember, we started with school, by the way, to bombard this event. So because this will affect the Iranian people. Well, the latest where this is heading, particularly after April 6th, it is heading towards targeting areas that impact the Iranian people first and foremost. Because when you hit universities, when you hit schools, when you hit energy, petrochemical energy, and when you hit the bridges, these are directly affect the people. The theory now in the Americans' mind is that this will put pressure on the Iranian government to, number one, fix this infrastructure, which they were not going to be able to do because of the highest cost. And then, just as we did in Iraq back when sanctions were imposed on Saddam, this will force the Iranian people to rise against the established government, the ruling people in Iran. Those are all. I think the message is very clear, and I think that's where the United States has sort of been in one way or another consistent. That we are going to go to Iran, we are going to serve the Israeli interest, and we are going to be stuck there. But as we go on, there will be some challenges, but we are not going to stop from contributing to the dismantlement of in Iran in ways that would please the Israelis. We wonder why the idea of eliminating nuclear Iran comes back. Continues to come back and back and forth all the time. So that's where we are. But as they continue enter into this venture, going with the perception or the calculation that this is going to be an easy task, realizing now that this is a difficult task, and then now the question is, we have to continue on this path, but we have to find a way to get out with the perception that we were winning. And that's why the message is constantly about we're doing well, we're doing all of that. On the one hand, it serves the purpose of the base, but at the same time, it gives the impression publicly that there was something worth that the United States did by this action, while in fact it's been a disaster on all aspects.
Clear, Dr. Hamoud. Dr. Julia Rocknifad, since Dr. Hamoud mentioned the nuclear pretext, this leads me to this question. Do you think it was enough to justify breaking negotiations that we were hearing were going very well? Or maybe just the Gulf countries wanted this and incited the United States to do it, or maybe they were just dragged in and they didn't want this in the very beginning.
Yes, maybe they were going too well, those negotiations, that it was decided that it can be, by whichever party, that it cannot be allowed to proceed any further. We indeed have heard from the Omani foreign minister, who was the mediator in those talks, that they were on a cusp of reaching some sort of an agreement when the war started, which gave us an understanding that the negotiations themselves were used just as a pretext for amassing forces in the Middle East in order to administer that strike. Iran's nuclear program has never really been a true reason for the hostility for the hostility towards Iran, for the vilification of Iran. Indeed, it is important. It's vitally important for Israel, where the threat perception is quite different from the rest of the world in what comes to Iran. Iran is seen as a major threat. Iran is seen even as a force behind the October 7th attacks, as it supported Hamas and it supported its so-called axis of resistance in the region that directly targets Israel. So should Iran acquire nuclear weapons, it would pose even further existential threat to Israel. That's why in Israel that decision has been made. But for the rest of the world and for the United States in particular, even Iran's ballistic missile is not as much of a problem. It has been confirmed by the U.S. intelligence community. We've heard the recent statements as well on that Iran does not possess delivery means simply to reach the United States and Europe for that matter as well. Only the US facilities in the region, which it eventually has done, including also speaking of extra-regional attacks, the attempted attack at the US base in Diego Garcia. Reportedly unsuccessful. So the nuclear issue has been used maybe as a pretext, but that was not a true reason for this invasion, for starting this war on Iran. As for the Gulf states, the states of the Persian Gulf, I don't think that reasonably, although we also, if we look at the United States, we would think that reasonably the United States would not start this war on Iran. And for many years, many analysts, very thorough ones, discussed the possible options, and all of them came to the conclusion that without ground operation, the regime change, which was declared also as one of the aims of the operation in Iran, is not possible, and ground operation also is going to turn into a bloodbath. There is a high possibility, so no, reasonably, that's not going to happen. So reasonably, when we look at the Gulf states, it was not in their interest to start this war. And we also are seeing how much they are exercising restraint in this, and also we're hearing from the back channels they're also complaining to the United States quite a lot that they were not even warned about the start of this campaign. Well, the U.S. own alliance closer to home across Atlantic were not warned about that. Also, there was no heads up. And they took it as also as a justification of not joining the United States in this campaign with very unclear aims. For the Middle Eastern states, and in particular the Gulf states, that is going to lead to such a restructuring of the region and to the loss of credibility as a financial and tourist haven, in particular for the likes of the United Arab Emirates or Qatar, that it's hard to imagine how they could be proponents of this war, even though they are condemned in Iran for this so-called aggression against them, which are retaliatory strikes against their infrastructure, and in particular American targets. We've heard just now, I think the Oracle, the company was targeted in the UAE. It's hard to imagine how they could want, how they could desire that war, which leads to such incredible losses and loss of their reputation, their well-established reputation, at least for some time.
Thank you indeed. And now let me move to Dr. James Kavanagh. Dr. James, what would happen, according to you, if the Gulf countries perhaps are found in a situation where the U.S. withdraws abruptly or perhaps escalates unilaterally? Would you think perhaps the Gulf is ready to pay for this war and perhaps substitute the USA with some kind of a new realignment?
Well, if the United States and Israel, and I think at this point there's still one entity in this war, if the U.S.-Israel escalate, and if this war continues, and look what happened when Israel attacked the gas field in Iran. Trump put out a Truth Social, Israel is not going to do that again, all caps, okay? He didn't want this to go any further. Israel came back the next day. They just kept doing it. He can't say that anymore. He's got to follow Israel along. So the problem here is, if this war continues, and Israel will try to make sure it continues and keeps the United States in it, okay? They want Iran destroyed the coherence of the state destroyed, as your previous guest said. They want chaos. They know they're not going to get another government in Iran, and they want Iran broken up, destroyed, weakened, so that it's not a power, so that it doesn't have any military capability, not nuclear. There's no nuclear. They want to get rid of the possibility of nuclear weapons, but they had an agreement that did that. They want to get rid of Iran's ballistic missiles, their ability to resist Israel. They want Iran to bend the knee and to be another country in the region that accepts the hegemony of Israel. So that's what they're looking for, and they're not going to get it unless they destroy the country. So what's going to happen to the Gulf states? Look what's happening to the Gulf states. Iran is not sitting back and allowing this to happen. They are retaliating, and they are destroying this natural gas hold facility in Kuwait, which is a huge thing. This is not just natural gas, it's helium, it's fertilizer precursors, it's aluminum plants. These are the supply chains for fundamental economic supplies throughout the world that are being destroyed by, not entirely destroyed, but set back. That it's going to take 5 years at least to replace what that one natural gas, the elements of the natural gas plant that they destroyed in Kuwait, the largest natural gas processing facility in the world. This is a huge economic problem for the world. So the Gulf states have a choice. They can continue to play America's game, America and Israel's game, which has gotten them where? Nowhere. As your previous guest said, and what they saw when Israel attacked Qatar, what did the United States do? Oh, that's just like before. Oh, that's a terrible thing. With Israel, shouldn't have done that, but we're going to support them anyway. We're not going to do anything to them. We're not going to punish them for it. And when this comes along, we're going to the American bases in those countries become targets, and they're becoming targets because they're supporting the American and Israeli attack, and that's going to happen. So they're going to have to decide whether they're going to continue to go with the American Israelis or whether they're going to go to another way of organizing the entire security architecture of the Gulf and of the Middle East. And I don't know, but if they don't go another way, and it would be very helpful to ending the war if they would strongly say, we're no longer part of this, America. We're not going to allow your bases back in. We don't want any part of this stuff anymore. We don't want any part of what you and Israel want to do with Iran. We're going to build up our relationships with other countries and with Iran in another way, on another axis. So if that doesn't happen, they're going to be in trouble. And the whole world is in trouble. I mean, this is going to create huge economic problems around the world, and it is already now.
Thank you for bringing that point up, which leads me to the next question to you, Dr. Zarour Khudr. The U.S. has proven an unpredictable security partner, just like our previous guest was highlighting. Could this spark Gulf realignment toward new security arrangements, perhaps?
Well, I think the Gulf states have no other choice but to leave this unrealistic, unreliable partner in Washington. I think already the Saudis are looking to Pakistan, forming an alliance with Turkey, Egypt, and Pakistan, I believe. Russia is coming on board, and the Chinese may be coming on board. The biggest winner here, let's be realistic, it is China, sitting back, eyeing Taiwan, eyeing the entire South China Sea, which they will control eventually if the U.S. continues to miscalculate. The Gulf states for the last 70 years have not benefited at all, except possibly 1990, 1991, they were protected from Iraqi forces. And that was the only time. Since then, they've been a dependent ally, an ally that only spends money. Notice 2016, 2024, the first overseas trip by Mr. Trump was to Saudi Arabia, to the Gulf, collected $3 trillion and nothing to show for, unfortunately for them. So they are trying to look for a new balancing act in the Middle East and the global, well, like the greater Middle East, if you will. I think Algeria may be on board. Certainly other countries in Central Asia may be coming on board. I think the Iranian is noticing that they may be, if there's a new government, will position themselves to become a reliable partner. Because in 1970s, from 68 to 79, the policemen, if you will, of the Gulf was the Iranians under the Shah. There were a lot of missed opportunities and miscommunication from Washington. Since 60s, late 60s, President Nixon has used the same realist perspective, if you will, by bombing Vietnam, Cambodia, Southeast Asia, hoping to bring the Vietnamese, the Viet Congs, to the negotiating table. That did not work. That forced the U.S. to withdraw from Vietnam. The same thing we may be possibly witnessing from Iran. The U.S. will, talking about, open the gate of hell, but simply put, that's not realistic. They know, the Iranians know, everyone knows how much power, military power, the U.S. has. They know that could be blown out to smithereens. But it's not a realistic option, simply because too many partners in the region, they may be harmed. The biggest country that's negatively affected is Pakistan, and that's a reliable ally. Turkey is in a neighborhood. That's the best ally the U.S. has in the Middle East. Not Israel, it is Turkey. So all these allies will be affected, and we don't want to see millions of Iranians becoming refugees in Europe. I don't want to see another Iraq or Syria or Libya, Libyans floating into European cities. So we haven't learned from those mistakes. We had 70 years to go back to the UN resolutions 242 after 1967 and 338 after this 1973 war. We have not acted on that. No American president pushed the Israelis due to the power of the AIPAC lobby in Washington. And most of our politicians, unapologetically, basically have said, like Ted Cruz, for example, out of Texas, said, I was elected 13 years ago to serve the interests of Israel. Never mention America or the American people. We have Mr. Senator Graham from South Carolina doing the same thing. He's cheerleading for the Netanyahu government to do this, to continue with the genocide, not only in Gaza, now it's in Lebanon, temporary in Syria, Iraq, and now Iran. For the last 15 to 18 years, the Israeli forces have been assassinating scientists, professors, technocrats, those who basically work in a nuclear program in Iran. They have been assassinated. And why would the Israelis have a problem suddenly with the nuclear plan or program in Iran? Keep in mind, from 1976 to 1979, it was the Israeli scientists that were working on the Iranian nuclear project. In 1950s and 60s, it was the U.S. working on the same program. So we have not learned, and we have not continued to maintain our consistency over time. And China is basically gambling now, not gambling, excuse me, but missed term. I think they're trying to create another sphere of influence, not only in Central Asia, but throughout the Middle East, throughout Africa, and the U.S. is kind of taking a backseat in international relations.
Thank you indeed. Very insightful. Dr. Hamoud Salhi, I get back to you. Donald Trump does suggest he could withdraw even without a formal agreement. And here China is mentioned as a guarantor. Do they have the interest, the Chinese that is, and would guarantees perhaps satisfy Iran if there were any?
The Iranians have been clear. They want a permanent solution. They don't want to be in this situation where they are constantly threatened by Israel, by the United States. Therefore, the role that China could play in that is very, very important. But will China deliver those kind of guarantees? Certainly what we've seen, both from China and Russia, that we hear there are some assistance provided to this to Iran. We also know that the Chinese prefer to work behind the scene. They are very strategic, and they tend not to get too much involved in controversial areas, meaning that they have been calling for resolving this attack on Iran peacefully. They want to play the role of a wise person. And from that perspective, if they are going to play a guarantor, they will be, if a guarantor is needed, China will be the best country to do that for the Iranians. President Donald Trump, I think in the end, he's correct. He can do whatever he wants. He has the ability to make decisions, spontaneously, or based on what he sees serves best. I think number one, his agenda, and second, the United States, and then the rest comes after that. But I think in this case, it's not up to him to decide the outcome of this war. It will be there will be some serious negotiations, whether behind the scene or after or in the open. The Iranians are very, very sort of adamant and wants this to be to the end. Certainly, the conversation, or our previous guest talked about the role of the Gulf countries. They could play a major role in there, but let's not forget that these countries have a security pact with the United States. They are strongly tied to the United States economically, investment, and to a point where the United States has been self-sufficient in terms of oil. And Donald Trump is out saying, buy our oil, and he said that we don't need the Middle Eastern oil. This is not just Donald Trump talking, but since 2016, under Barack Obama's presidency, the United States made sure to be independent of the oil of the Gulf countries. So from that perspective, the Gulf countries have a little leverage to do by way of forcing their decision on Donald Trump to end this war in favorable conditions, despite the losses that they are going to have. So Donald Trump has the ability to put an end to this. But the question today is what we've seen on the ground and what's happening. Will the Iranian accept that decision? And then you have on the other side, you have the Israelis that also wants this thing to continue until perhaps the fate of the Israeli prime minister, a legal battleground are resolved, so he could go back to the business of whatever the court, and that would be a little bit longer, considering that the elections are not in the corner. But in the case of the United States, you do have elections, and that might sort of force Trump to take a decision that would, this is why he's looking for a way out. But he has to find a way that will get him out, being perceived that he has done has had some success. The Iranians are not helping.
And now I get back to you, Dr. Julia Rocknifad. You did mention earlier that there seems to be some kind of broader realignments. Countries previously perhaps distant from China and Russia are building ties. One might wonder whether this is something temporary or a deeper shift. How do you see it?
We will see about that. Of course, it will be difficult to judge about it right now. But the fact that, and I think Robert Kagan, whose article we discussed earlier, also points at that with the loss of trust vested in the United States as a reliable partner, there will be more appetite to interact and to build deeper ties with other partners, such as Russia and China here in particular. And many countries, many states in the Middle East already are major trading, their major trading partner is China. So that is possibly going to continue, especially with that policy that China pursues, that there is no strings attached. When it brings economic benefits to other states. So China is definitely in it for a long run. It's not going to outright declare that now there is another sort of unipolarity with Beijing presiding over the world. No, it's not its target, at least not for now. Russia also has proven resilience within the ongoing war, but that resilience is judged by its ability to produce large number of munitions to continue this war of attrition. Economically, it's not as strong. Its capacity has been severely dented, although now with the lifting of the US sanctions against Russia, it's able to earn more with also higher oil prices. So it definitely benefits it, but it's not as much of that long-term economic partner like China is. So with China, we can conclude that with China, yes, the states are in it for a long term in the Middle East, in Africa, and elsewhere. Even for Iran has been trying to ascertain its independence for a long time, trying to not be dependent on China, including economically, to be self-sufficient in terms of domestic production of things, and it has been quite successful in that. But right now, it is going to need some sort of economic assistance, in particular to fend off the domestic unrest that might resume after some time after the war is over. So it could rely on that support from Russia and China economically. But yeah, I guess in what concerns China, that is going to be a long-term, quite sustainable and no strings attached policy, and no history of political interference is going to strengthen China's credentials in that.
Thank you indeed. And now let's just go to some endgame scenarios. And here, Dr. James Kavanagh, could the Zionist entity become a scapegoat of some sort if the war goes badly, perhaps? And how does its U.S. support influence American policy?
Well, I wouldn't call it a scapegoat, because a scapegoat is someone who's not responsible but being blamed for something, whereas the Zionist regime is responsible for this. This is the Zionist project in action, and it is absolutely crucial. The American support for Zionism. I mean, it's more important to Israel than its nuclear weapons. It's a more important weapon, a more powerful weapon, and there is no off-ramp for this, for Donald Trump, for the United States, if it doesn't break with Zionism, because this is the point. Iran now is insisting on, as I said, a whole new architecture of security in the Middle East. And it's one that won't be based on the hegemony of Israel and the United States. That's what Iran is going to insist on. And they're going to fight for that. And the Israelis, more than the Americans, but they're going to drag the Americans along with them as long as the Americans guarantee this. The Israelis do not want to give up. They want Iran to be forced to accept the hegemony of Israel. That's what this war is about, okay? And one side will win and another side will lose. So if Iran is forced into submission, then U.S. and Israel are running the show again. I don't think that's going to happen. That's going to take a hell of a war. That's going to take another Iraq, another Vietnam. Didn't happen, didn't work there, okay? If Iran and if the United States and Israel are pushed out essentially from that position of hegemony in the Middle East, and Israel is forced to restrict itself, to restrict the Zionist project in ways it doesn't want, that's a whole new ballgame altogether. I'm sorry to tell you my fear is that Israel will never accept that. I'm sorry to tell you that I think that Israel will use every weapon at its disposal to prevent that from happening. And if somehow that doesn't, my prediction of that doesn't come true, which I hope it doesn't, I just don't know how it could happen. I don't think that Israel or the United States, but certainly Israel, and therefore the United States, are going to accept the loss that Iranian hegemony, Iranian as one of the dominant states in the region that is never going to go away and is never going to be pushed into submission. I don't think that either of them are willing to accept that, and I think we have to look forward to a very nasty. I think the Israelis do not care. Everybody has to understand this. The Israelis don't care what the cost is to anybody else in the world, and they want to come out of this as strong or stronger with the Zionist project going through Lebanon, going through Gaza, without any restriction. And if they're going to do and use every weapon at their disposal to make sure that happens. So I'm not very sanguine about, very enthusiastic or very optimistic about how this is going to go. But we'll have to see. Remember that Donald Trump, I'll give one, Donald Trump, don't forget in 2019, he ordered an attack on Iran. After the Iranians dropped, I think it was 2019, I think, after the Iranians put down an American drone, a Reaper, which is an expensive drone, and the neocon, and he ordered an attack. The military was ready to go, and he called it off with 10 minutes to go. Lindsey Graham was annoyed, was furious at him. The neocons were furious at him. So I don't know what Donald Trump is going to do. He's very capricious. He's very contradictory. But I know that the Israelis do not want this to stop until Iran surrenders.
Thanks, Professor. Now, Dr. Khudr Zarour, if Washington does fail to secure an acceptable off-ramp, what practical settlement options exist that both Iran and the U.S. could accept?
Well, here's really the obvious dilemma for the United States. The obvious dilemma is, even if the U.S. under Mr. Trump reaches an agreement with the Iranian regime, or government, if you will, there is the wild card always in the background trying to undermine any agreement that the U.S. will reach. And that is Mr. Netanyahu. Mr. Netanyahu has went behind the United States, did what he wants to do to undermine the U.S. Mediation and any agreement. In fact, last summer, Qatar, the U.S., and Hamas were reaching a deal in Qatar, and this one they were bombed, again, to undermine the U.S. The conflict between the U.S. and Israel will surface if the U.S. reaches an agreement. So there is no end in sight until and unless the Israeli government, far-right Israeli government, is kind of constrained and forced to negotiate a settlement with the Palestinians. All this has started back in 1948. It's not a surprise that Mr. George C. Marshall, Secretary of State, 1948, he told Mr. Truman, we should not recognize an independent state of Israel until we have an acceptable agreement with the Arab states. But Mr. Truman, he wanted the Zionist lobby votes and money. He basically went ahead for it because Mr. George C. Marshall specifically, clearly told Mr. Truman, we should not do that because we will have to forever continue to support the state of Israel, to defend it and to support it financially. And we have been in this dilemma since 1948. So there is no end in sight unless and until we go back and negotiate based on 242 and UN Resolution 242 and Resolution 338. And we have to end the occupation of Lebanon. It has been going on since 1960s, 70s. Shab'a farms that are in parts of Syria and Lebanese border. That has not been liberated, according to Lebanese officials. That has to end. And the Israelis are not negotiating. They're not willing to negotiate because they have, again, as we have heard from Mr. Jim earlier, the Zionist project is to control from the Nile to the Euphrates. Certainly, we have seen the current Netanyahu administration clearly stating to the world, once we are finished with Iran, we're going after Turkey and we're going after Egypt. These messages do not sit well with people in the region.
Mm-hmm. And as we are reaching the end of this coverage, briefly, Dr. Hamoud Salhi, could the U.S. backing of the Zionist entity and its actions ultimately weaken regional stability rather than enhance security?
Well, it has done so. The outcome, what we're seeing today, is a clear indication that the Israeli-American is detrimental to the security and peace of the region. Today, we see the destruction of all areas for the benefit of Israel. And this, in the aftermath, when this is settled, the region will pay for that. And certainly, the Americans have to come to terms with what's happening with their alliance with Israel. Certainly, the tides are changing. There is support for more today for Palestinians. There are discourses. The narrative is changing, and it is impacting, and it will impact the upcoming elections. That in itself is a strong indicator that the United States has to start to rethink its relationship with Israel. We've seen bills come into Congress for discussion and losing by a few votes, or for the fact that they made the whole hierarchy of bringing a bill to discussion on the floor of the Congress is a big plus. So definitely, but at the end of all of this, I think no matter, the United States interest is very clear. The Israeli lobby is very clear on what it wants. I think it's also an opportunity, perhaps this is the opportunity for the region itself to take matters into its hand. Within the Gulf countries, perhaps this is a time for the Gulf Cooperation Council to revise or to look into its relation, how it creates its relationship with the United States, considering the constraint. There is no reason to have, or the current formula of having each state signing a pact with the United States undermine their collective action. And it has impacted how the Gulf Cooperation Council does its business of supposedly protecting the area. So that's one area perhaps where the region start to look into its mechanism. And so it's the same thing by the Arab League. We need to start to look at ways of how to make this happen. And finally, we have to be cautious about the big impact that the end of this war will have. We are on the verge of looking a strong wind that look to see the Israel and United States relationship cut, and normalization with Israel will sort of be in serious question.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much, Dr. Hamoud Salhi. And in less than a minute, Dr. Julia Rocknifad, looking ahead, what are the possible endgame scenarios for you, and how might this reshape U.S. influence, not just in the Middle East, but globally? But briefly, please.
Well, it's very hard to do within 1 minute, the global projections, but I'd just say that I agree pretty much with all the speakers in today's panel, and that the region is going to be restructured. It's quite an irreversible occurrence, what just happened. The regional states, I'd like to zoom in on this, the Gulf states will have to deal indeed with their own security, in particular in what concerns the passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Let's not forget about that. And for that, they will have to maintain a good relationship, if not security arrangement finally materializes, then at least good relationship with Iran in order to provide for the passage of the freight of the energy loads through the Strait of Hormuz. It's also, I don't think, far from the truth that we should not expect any extension of the Abraham Accords in any foreseeable future, and even maybe the UAE rethinking its commitment to those accords. But I think the bottom line that globally, of course, we've all seen the effects, and the realignment is taking place right now as we speak. In the region, there needs to be a different security arrangement without reliance on foreign actors.
Thanks so much. That's it for tonight's discussion. The Middle East remains on a knife edge with tensions, uncertainty, and high stakes for the region and the world. We thank our guest, Dr. Julia Ruknifat. Thank you indeed. Dr. Hamoud Salhi, much appreciated. Dr. James Kavanagh, thank you so much. And Dr. Khudra M. Zarour, thanks a million for sharing all your insights. And of course, thank you, our viewers, for tuning into our channel. And do join us next time as we continue to follow these developments closely. Take care.